With WUCC, we find where we belong. Every prayer is a whisper that carries us high. In the hands of the faithful, we reach for the sky. Voices of hope, painting colors so bright. With every heart touched, we're changing the night. Through the day, WUCC 99.9, guiding our way. In this church without walls, we're never alone. With each voice united, we're making it home. Listen daily, let the Spirit unfold. In the voice of truth, our journey is gold.
It's the Daily Steward Show with Bill Robinson. What does God's word say about stewardship? Being a good steward. Working out your salvation. Sharing the gospel. Casting out demons. Healing the sick. Fulfilling your role as husband or wife. Attending church. Work. Handling money. Gifts and talents. Managing our time. Yeah, there's a lot to say. Tune in Wednesdays at 10 here on WUCC 99.9 FM.
Well, good morning. It's another great day in the state of South Carolina, and this is your host, Bill Robinson, coming from Station building live, and I'm here with the great Pastor Bill George from University Parkway Church of God.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be here.
Wait a minute, Pastor. Something looks different about you. I can't tell. Is it your birthday today?
It is. And you know what? I thought I was going to be 68, but I'm only 67.
Is that right?
So I got a whole year back today.
You're a little younger than me, by the way. That's great. Well, happy birthday.
Thank you, sir.
Happy birthday to you. I have to ask you, did you write a song for yourself because you're so talented?
No, I didn't.
You should do a rap song, Happy Birthday.
Yeah. Maybe I should, yeah.
Well, Conquering with Christ, LLC is a Christian broadcasting company. On the web, you can locate WUCC 99.9 FM at www.cwchrist.com, where you can find on that website how to support the station and how to support this broadcast specifically, if you so please. If you would like to contact me directly with questions, you can reach me at bill@thedailysteward.com. And the viewpoints expressed today are not necessarily the viewpoints or opinions of the station owner or the station. So we want to always ask, what is a steward? And that's someone who manages something. And I heard the term steward used last night on a call I was on, and the person was saying, we steward everything that God gives us, and that is so true. And we have to even steward our walk as a Christian. Isn't that right?
Amen.
And so on the last show, if you'll remember, we talked about leadership, and we had 3 godly ladies on last week, and I feel kind of lonely this time.
Yeah.
It was great having them on. There was a quote that I wanted to quote, and I didn't get to it. It was Psalm 32:8, and all our quotes are out of the King James Version, and it says, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way in which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with my eye. And I think that's so true. Even when we think that God is not guiding us or helping us or walking beside us, He is, even in the darkest moments that we have. So before we start this week's topic of communication makes great leaders, let's look at some headlines and some other tidbits. So I wanted to kind of give an update on what's happening in the world. July, at least in the United States, July retail sales revealed a real downdraft or downshift in household consumption. And so the overall July decline was 0.6%, which was significant because it's the largest decline in 18 months. So why does that matter? Well, if you're thinking about buying a large ticket item, you may want to wait or give it a pause because prices could start coming down. In fact, there's been some talk about deflationary pressure versus inflationary pressure, and that would be interesting. Also, the household savings rate fell to just 2.7%, and that's from a high of 6.1% pre-COVID. And, this means that most households don't really have a good emergency fund set up in case there's a large one-time expense. And then per payments, PYNTS.com, they published a new reality check, the Paycheck to Paycheck report. And in 2021, the percent of consumers living paycheck to paycheck was 57% versus 2025, which showed the percent living paycheck to paycheck was 67%. So, Pastor Bill, you may hear something called the K-shaped economy. And, I always, wanting to talk about that because a lot of people wonder what that means. I don't know if you understand what that refers to.
Not really.
Well, if you look at the letter K, it's got a straight line, which would be like the axis of a graph, and then it's got a line going up and a line going down. The line going up represents the investor class because the Dow Jones, the S&P, the NASDAQ have been going crazy. So the investor class has been making a lot of money, and then the working class, represented by the downward slope, has been struggling primarily because of higher gas prices, higher cost of living, food costs. Every time we go to the grocery store, I'm just shocked at the bill. So that's why it's called K-shaped economy. And then we've heard about gas going up. Now there's a headline saying that motor oil shortages are pressuring the automakers. And I guess they use a lot of motor oil when they're testing and lubricating engines and getting them ready to hit the showrooms. And then OpenAI's data center, Ohio data center, NVIDIA cut its share of support from $250 billion, that's $250 billion, to $120 billion. And all these data centers, there's a lot of negative publicity coming out now, but it seems like there's no shortage of local approvals. And I think we all have to be diligent to understand what our local governments are doing, because they can approve these things, and next thing you know, you have one next to you and it's generating a lot of sound and lights at night and sucking up the water and using up the electricity. What's interesting is NVIDIA put together a $500 billion, that's $500 billion commitment to funding AI data centers. And, it seems like if you look at a map of those, they're everywhere. And then the Trump family-backed World Liberty Trust Company received some preliminary government approvals, which is not surprising, I guess, since Trump is in charge of the government, to establish a national trust bank for its USD1 stablecoin business. I actually looked this up on the web, and you can currently invest in it. It basically is like a money market, but it's guaranteed to be $1, whereas money markets generally are guaranteed to be a dollar, but there can be what's called a money market where you break the dollar. And that means that the underlying investments that are supposed to be stable somehow become unstable, and the money market is worth less than a dollar. So the idea behind the stable coin is that it would always be a stable $1. And there's actually 4 billion of that in circulation. And I think, we can see that eventually currency is going to go away. And more evidence that, by the way of that, you got any nickels in your pocket?
I had one yesterday.
Well, hang on to those. They're going to be worth something, just like copper pennies, even though copper pennies are mostly made of zinc, like the nickel. But the nickel, it costs 13 cents to mint, and the Treasury is looking at getting rid of the nickel. And what's interesting there is that, you know how you go to these retailers and they say, "Hey, do you want to round up to the next dollar?" I don't know what you say, but I always say no.
Yeah.
I said I need those pennies and nickels and quarters and dimes. But there's a bill in Congress right now where they're looking at rules that would allow businesses standardization on rounding up to the next dollar. So we can already see that it looks like they're planning on getting rid of currency, and if you use currency, you're going to have to be rounded up. I don't know if they're ever talking about rounding down, but I've never seen anybody round down or ask me, "Hey, do you want to round down?" I would certainly say yes, but no one's ever asked me that question. And then here's some great news. If you don't itemize, which is really difficult to itemize because they jacked up the standard deduction on your taxes. So, you get a larger deduction before you get to exemptions in your income. So you're not having to worry about keeping track of all these expenses that you want to deduct. But under the big, beautiful bill that was passed by President Trump last year, they actually inserted a little gift to us this year, and it says if you make charitable contributions, so for example to the church, you can deduct up to $1,000 over and above your standard deduction if you're single. And if you're married filing jointly, you get to deduct up to $2,000. So that's a real should be a real help. I mean, it should help us get a little more money back at the end of the year.
Amen.
So that would be for this year's returns filed in 2027. So it's for the 2026 tax year, and those are for cash contributions. So unfortunately, everybody that's hauled clothes to the Goodwill can't deduct the clothes. You can only deduct cash contributions.
Brother Bill, do you know what Phyllis and Gigi and Trump have in common?
Oh, no. What is that?
Big, beautiful bills.
I love it. That's great. You're just trying to score points because it's your birthday.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm sure. Did Phyllis cook you like a pancake this morning with a little smiley face and some whipped cream?
She gave me a kiss as I was waking her
up.
Oh,
there you go. That's pretty good right there. I agree. Well, we want to get started on this year show's topic. And again, last week I mentioned good leaders are great leaders when they can learn the art of communication. And I feel so strongly about this, I thought it would be good to have a show on it. So what is communication? We have to ask that question today because is it texting? Is it an emoji? Which we didn't even know what that was before. Is it a post on social media? If you're President Trump, that's how he communicates. He posts on social media for the most part. Is it an email? Is it a phone call? Is it a speech or a Zoom or a video conference? It can be all of those. And what do leaders need to communicate and when? So, are they trying to communicate a vision? Should they be doing that? A change in mission of the organization, a pause in services, announcement of a new service or product, a mistake? That's a difficult communication. I've had to do that before. An accomplishment, those are always fun communications. What do leaders need to communicate, or who do leaders need to communicate with? And, a lot of times that's their inner circle, their employees, their customers, the general public, their stakeholders. Stakeholders can go beyond customers. They can be partners or collaborators. When I was leading an organization, often I'd have to communicate to all the stakeholders. What influences the communications of leaders? It can be fear, it can be exuberance, it can be truth, it can be politics, social media responses or likes, it can be relationships, timeliness, there can be timely topics, something new, or a motivation to educate. So, these are not all inclusive. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, but these are just kind of thoughts that I had off the top of my head as I was thinking about how I used to communicate as a leader and what I looked at sometimes. So I don't know if you have a single factor that you think is the world today is mainly focused on in terms of a platform, or if there's anything you want to add to what I just talked about, Pastor Bill.
I think communication through data and stuff is a big thing because it's used to manipulate how you buy things.
Yeah, that's a good one, and I should have had that one on my list. So thanks for bringing that up. Data is ruling the roost today when it comes to a lot of communications. So we just went over data for the economy. A lot of cities and counties and state now put out data on how they're spending money or the effects of certain goals are or grants are. So they're trying to communicate more with data. That's driven a lot of the data centers, and that a lot of people want to collect data and then report that out. And if you go to your point, if you go to Amazon, you can look and see how many people bought that product in the last month. And so, if you're looking at a product that says one bought this in the last month, and you got a similar product that says 1,000 bought this in the last month, which one are you likely to buy?
I was watching a video yesterday. It was talking about it was a guy that noticed that different people are getting different rates on buying and selling things. And so one of the things he did was, I think it was Michigan or Minnesota, he flew a drone over into the highest income area that you weren't allowed to be in unless you lived there. And then he did a order for like Uber, and then he had his friend do an order for Uber, and it was like, I think it was like 20-something% difference between the two. So the data is used not only for good things, I guess it's used to judge you. And I've heard China does that, that your citizenship based on the data that you have. So.
Yeah, no, that's true. And everybody's competing for your data. So, that's why Amazon started a pharmacy, is they want the medical data, not only your spending data, but they want your medical data. That's why they have a credit card. They want your spending habits outside of Amazon so that they can understand that. And that's why these data centers are being built, because they're taking everything and storing it somewhere so that they can parse that data, look at it, and there's good things to that. There's bad things to that. So it's not unusual now for you to be talking to your spouse or children about some product you saw on TV or something, and it pops up on your social media. So all this data is just being, like you said, it's a way to give feedback, but also to communicate. And then, the other thing that leaders have to get good at, especially when they're public speaking is body language. So I don't know if you notice body language a lot when you're doing your sermons.
Absolutely. Yeah. I used to have an associate pastor that would sit there and make faces and stuff while I was preaching. And then after it was over, he'd say, "Pastor, that was the best message I've heard." And I'm thinking, your body language didn't say that.
Yeah, and when I was doing public speaking a lot, I would watch body language as well, because you could tell, especially if it was educational, I would watch and see if people were I was losing them, or if I had to go back and ask a clarifying question, or, maybe take some questions and change the subject a little bit on the fly. So body language is important. And you could do a whole new show on body language, for sure. And even in today's digital communication world, the most effective communication is still face-to-face or verbal. And why do you think that is?
Well, let me get here. I noticed that when people say they write an email, it's faceless. So
Yes.
and if they and some people will type in all caps, and in the typing world, that's swearing at somebody, but a lot of people don't know that, so they just do all caps, and then you're getting mad at them because you think you're threatening. If you're doing it face to face, you can tell them more what they're meaning about it.
Right, and you get that real time feedback, so you can tell whether they misinterpreted what you said, and you can clarify it, or you can tell whether they're nodding and actively listening and maybe asking questions. So, it's a better form of communication, hands down. I don't know. Have you ever followed the Babylon Bee? Do you know anything about them?
I've heard a little bit about them, but I haven't really followed them or anything.
Yeah, they're satire, so they make fun of everything. And so they had, I think it was their 11 top ways to discipline current teenagers. And I really like two of them. One of them was tell them they have to leave their room. Remember, we would have to go to our room, but
Exactly.
but now if you tell a teenager they have to leave their room, that's like punishment.
Yeah.
But the other thing, the top way to punish them was to have them force them to have a verbal conversation with somebody, and I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to talk a little bit about being an effective public speaker, and this can even apply to when you're making a phone call, or you're doing a Zoom meeting and you're the presenter, or you're even going to talk to your boss or somebody you're delegating work to. And that is, the first thing, you should organize your thought. You want to make sure you have your thoughts clearly organized, so that you don't drift away and get distracted from what you were going to say. And then it's always, if you're doing a meeting or a Zoom meeting or a public speech, it's good to start on time and end on time. And a lot of people I noticed on Zoom when I was in organization would wait till everybody got there. And a lot of times the meeting wouldn't start for almost 15 minutes. And then you just wasted and disrespected the 50 people that showed up on time for the 10 that didn't. And so, it was always good to start on time and end on time. And then it's good to know your audience in advance. I've spoken to different groups before, and I always want to know in advance who is going to be in the audience. Is it going to be peers? So that if I'm doing a educational or technical speech, I know that they're going to be similar to my level. Or is it going to be individuals that maybe are employees, and I'm educating or doing a technical presentation, and they have no knowledge, so I have to kind of build that base. So you would just want to know who's your audience. And then you want to prepare the message, like I said, to fit the audience. And don't be afraid to adjust the message. And that's sometimes based on the feedback that you're seeing. You may have to back up, you may have to pause, you may have to add a little bit of clarification, because when we write something out, sometimes it doesn't always, it strikes us one way, but you can tell the audience may not pick up on it the way you thought they would. And then you can confirm the message being received. You can clarify points using feedback. You can confirm the message by answering questions. And then you can modify the message on the fly for additional insights. Sometimes when I've spoken, I've had to modify that message on the fly. One time I was speaking about vision loss, and at a big meeting, and somebody took my speech, and I had to come up with a new speech in about 5 minutes. So, you never know. And also to be an active listener and an active learner, and strive to improve. And what are the advantages of public speaking? Well, again, it's learning to organize your thoughts, learning to read the audience, recognizing how to tailor your message to the audience, mastering the subject. A lot of times when you teach, you learn a lot more than the people being taught, and that's always been my case. You answer questions confidently. If you don't know the answer, you can always say, I don't know the answer to that, I'll get back to you. And it's a way for personal growth and career advancement. So I don't know if you have anything to add to those, Pastor Bill.
It's also, I think, a way of gaining trust, because if you're a person, especially in the business world like you are, if you come and tell me something and you are correct about what you're saying, the next time you come to tell me something, I'm going to believe what you say.
Right.
So I think it's a major part of gaining trust. If you're just a mouthpiece that comes in there and just is putting off the stuff that they want you to say and not answering or giving, then I'm not going to trust you.
Right. Very true. And then one of the greatest skills a leader has is the ability to seek counsel from a variety of sources, and placing value on feedback and becoming an active listener. So I go to James 1:19, and it says, Wherefore, my brethren, let every man be swift to hear, and slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Boy, I wish I'd learned that early on in my career. It would have saved me some embarrassment a couple times. And then Job 38 verse 2 says, Who is this that darketh counsel by words without knowledge? So I think it's what that's saying, if I read into that right, is, if you're just spouting off words, but you're really not using good knowledge, then that's really not great counsel. And then Proverbs 15:22 says, Without counsel, purposes are disappointed, but in the multitude of counselors they are established. One thing I did learn early on that did help my career, with Price Waterhouse, it was a very technical job. I had to know a lot of rules and regulations, and you didn't, these were always gray areas, and you didn't know if you were interpreting them correctly a lot of times. So what I used to do is I'd come up with my interpretation, and then I'd walk down the hall and ask a couple of my peers. I said, I got this issue. I'm thinking of how to answer this client. This is what I'm thinking I'm going to say. Do you have any thoughts or comments? And a lot of times, in fact, most of the time, I always improved the ability to provide the answer by getting additional input. So I don't know if that's ever been something that you've kind of established in over your years, if you've got certain people you go to. And
I have, because especially in the banking, thing that I worked, there was always people from different cultures, and so I might would say something, the way that I would say it to you because we're pretty much the same culture, but it would be offensive to them. I remember Church of God actually went from they used to have the ladies ministry to women's ministry because in some countries ladies was offensive.
Oh yeah.
So it's always a good idea to have somebody, especially if you can get somebody from that, that knows something about that culture.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And that's a very good point as well. And culture can vary based on demographic in the country as well as geographic area. So, they may do something different in Hawaii than they do in South Carolina when they're speaking. And then leaders have to resist the temptation to surround themselves with yes men. So honest feedback is better than flattery. And I think of this like like looking out the window of a car. When you're driving and you're about to make a lane change, you look in that left-hand mirror, but you do have a blind spot. So if you just merge based on the mirror alone, you could have an accident, a pretty bad accident. So you always have to have that additional look to make sure you're not about to do something terrible. And that's kind of the analogy here, is that you want people to tell you the truth and not just say, well, yes, you're right, Bill. You're right all the time. And if somebody said that to me, I was like, well, I know you're not telling me the truth because I'm never right all the time. So Job 17 verse 5 says, he that speaketh flattery to his friends, even the eyes of his children shall fail. And I think what that says is that if your family sees you speaking flattery, then your children can't really see truth. They're seeing this fakeness. And so it's important that as parents we do speak truth and we're not always trying to flatter people. And even with our own children, I think, you got to be careful not, the participation trophy became so big. You got to make sure you're telling kids truth. I mean, you don't want to keep telling a child that they're great at something when they need to improve. It's probably better to gently figure out a way to give them good feedback and correct them versus letting them have this belief that they're going to go into the NFL or the NBA and they don't need an education. It's good to have goals like that, and there's no doubt there can be great sports scholarships that happen because of that. But there's unrealistic expectations and there are realistic expectations. And you don't want to stomp somebody's dream, but you don't want to give them unrealistic expectations either. And then Proverbs 26:28, a lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it, and a flattering mouth worketh ruin. So again, if you're the type of person that somebody says, hey, should I do this? And they go, well, you always make great decisions. You should do it. That may not be the best advice, correct?
That's right. Yep.
And then 1 Thessalonians 2:5 says, for neither at any time used we flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness. So even in the New Testament, they were talking about not using flattering words. And then Proverbs 28:23 says, he that rebuketh a man afterward shall find more favor than he that flattereth with his tongue. And, I look at this in the terms of business world. And, several times I had to counsel somebody out of their position to say, hey, you're just not a good fit with our culture, or you're not a good fit for this position. I don't have anything else for you, or sometimes I do. I had a secretary at National Linen Service that I inherited from a previous person, and they had given this secretary raving reviews over and over again. Well, she didn't deserve any of that. So then when I got her, what it was very difficult for me to give her constructive criticism, because she would always say, well, so and so never told me that. And it turned out she was on the phone a lot. She wasn't getting her work done. I noticed that she had great communication skills, though. So I gave her a review, and I said, look, I said, it's not working out, but we have an opening in our credit department where we go after people that hadn't paid their accounts payable or accounts receivable, or we're granting new credit for customers. And I said, I think you'd be really good at that. And so I transferred her to that department, and she ended up being really great at that. She got promoted down there, and she was really loving it more than trying to help me, because I had pretty high standards and she wasn't able to meet my standards. You know, I was having to proofread everything she typed up and change everything, and you know, so it just wasn't working out. But as far as speaking and helping people and encouraging people and connecting with people, she was awesome. And so working in that area worked out really well. So I think as leaders, you know, even when we're working with employees, we don't want to flatter them unnecessarily, or give them feedback that is false feedback, because that can come back to haunt you. I don't know if you've ever faced that before.
I can't remember a time when it actually has come back and bit me, but it's easy for someone that wants to manipulate something else to say, well, Bill came and told me that it was okay for me to do that. And it might have been that you didn't say it wasn't okay, so they assumed it was okay.
Right.
But yeah, so I agree with you 100% on that stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those comments. Appreciate it. 2 reasons to seek wise counsel. You know, wise counsel can prevent mission drift. So one of the issues that I learned early is that, you know, if you're not careful, you can create a mission drift just by the things that you're saying or communicating. And what I mean by that is, if the organization, like in Michigan, if the organization was to put blind people to work, but I started talking about just accommodations all the time, which were important for work, people may forget that they're working to put people to work, and they're only accommodating needs or buying things that maybe are unnecessary. The example I'll give on that, again, and it came down to communication, was I had a new counselor, and their customer wanted a printer because they were going to do a remote job. And so, typically you have to write what's called an individualized plan for employment, and you have to justify those types of costs for the government grants that you're under. And so I was counseling this new counselor on the fact that, this wasn't going to be a good purchase, and they had refused it. The customer was livid. And so then I dealt with the customer, and what I talked to the customer, and I said, and this is why you want to have a face-to-face or a phone conversation. I said, what do you want the printer for? And they said, well, remote job. I said, what if the remote employer has certain specifications for a printer, and we buy you one, and it's not the one they wanted? Plus, maybe it doesn't have the right security features since you're working remote. And I said, 100% of the time, mostly, an employer that has remote work will buy the equipment for the person to do the remote work. And so after I explained that, then they understood why we turned them down, because they had to find an employer first, and then we had to figure out what we could do to support based on that employer. But there were some other things that this person needed that weren't communicated originally, and they were reasonable, like some additional software that was voice to text, that they were struggling to do resumes and that kind of thing, so that would help them. So that was okay, but it's just sometimes people have in their mind one thing, but when you really talk to them, it could be that through communication it turns out there's something else. And so that would be an example of mission drift. If we bought a printer just to accommodate the customer versus accommodating the employer, would have been a mission drift issue. Leaders must also weigh their words carefully. You can build people up as a leader, and you can tear people down. And when you're the leader, just like, if you're the president, and the president says, I think it was it Reagan or somebody that said we're going to bomb Russia, and he was joking, in the next hour or next 24 hours or something. And people went crazy because they thought he was serious. So the words coming out of your mouth as a leader are important words. And so you got to be careful that if you're joking, people know you're joking. And if you're not joking, people know you're serious. But if you're serious, you got to make sure you're saying things that are proper and weighed before you speak them, because that look up to what leaders say, and they're going to put a lot of weight on that. And then wise counsel should result in better decisions, like my example with Price Waterhouse, it always did. So it's always good to have those wise counsel and really to consider these things. So I don't know if you have any more comments. We've kind of beat that one to death, but
No, I don't.
Then the other thing that as a leader and actually as an employee, especially as an employee, or sometimes even as a volunteer worker, you got to know when to say no and know effect and be able to say it effectively. A lot of people get sucked into saying yes, because saying yes elevates them and it makes them feel important, and they end up taking on too much, which can actually destroy their reputation. So a lot of people saying no is difficult, but at the same time, saying yes is a lot of pressure that we can put on ourselves. So I think culturally, I just thought of this kind of from a culture standpoint, Pastor Bill. Our culture, where we grew up, it was always a yes. Like if the employer said, "Can you do this?" it was always like,
Absolutely.
"Yes, sir, we'll do that." And you didn't really think about working the overtime or sacrificing maybe time with the family, because that's the way you were raised. That's the way the culture was. And now I think the generation currently at work has been programmed on work-life balance so emphatically that to say yes is almost like a sin. It's like, no, that's not my job,
Yes.
And you see that even in retail. It's like, can you help me? Well, that's not my job. It's like, well, what is your job?
I just heard someone that had just gotten a job and they were going to take a day off. And somebody said, well, should you take a day off when you're just getting the job? And she said, well, I dictate when I take the days off. And, back in our generation, they dictated when you got to take the day off. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And my advice to young people would be, you don't have to say yes to everything. Certainly you want to try to maintain some semblance of work-life balance, but at the same time, if you want to advance, if you're in a position and you for 10 years and you're doing the same thing over and over again for 10 years, likely you're never going to get promoted because
Mm-hmm.
you're never doing the job of the person that supervises you.
Mm-hmm.
So the way you usually get promoted is you take on more responsibility, and you do that well, and then your supervisor sees that you can handle more responsibility and that you're willing to learn, and then you can get promoted that way. I was reading, however, one article that was talking about, I think it was in an accounting journal that I have, and it was talking about a lot of new accountants didn't want to get promoted because they saw how hard managers worked. And that's true in any leadership.
Mm-hmm.
People think leadership is easy, but I know that you, pastor, as a leader in the church, you're working all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I think people fail to see that when you're a leader, you have to be committed in such a way that you're doing more than a 40-hour work week usually.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's rare that you're leading and you're figuring out how to do a 40-hour work week. There's travel, there's all kinds of stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say this to young people too, besides saying yes at certain strategic points in their career so that they can learn and grow. If you do say yes and you take on that extra project, make sure you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, under promise and over deliver. So, what I mean by that, don't say, yes, I can do it and I'll have it tomorrow. Maybe it's a project that would be fairly easy to do, but say, yes, I'll take that on and give me about 2 or 3 weeks, knowing that you should be able to maybe complete it in 7 to 10 days. And then when you complete it early, guess what? Everybody's happy.
Everybody's happy.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good way to look at it. So under promise, over deliver if possible. And again, I like to say this, but everybody can lead from where they are. But if you do take on extra projects, again, lead with excellence. So when you do say no, some additional advice there. Be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't say like, no, that's not my job, or have an attitude. Say, well, you might say something like this. Well, so and so gave me a lot of work today, and I would be happy to help you, but today my schedule just doesn't accommodate that. Or if you're in a new position, and maybe that was a task that you used to do, you may have to say, well, I've been promoted. I would help you with that, but I want to make sure that my supervisor is aware that I'm going to be doing something that they didn't ask me to do in my current position. So there's ways to say things in a respectful way and make sure that you're not stepping on toes or violating anything.
It reminds me of the hospital or nursing home that I worked at. The nurses' aides would always be asking the nurses to help them with something, and one of the nurses finally said, "Well, I would help you, but the thing is, I can help you with your job, but there's no one that can help me with mine. So I have to really stay on my job."
Right.
And that was, I thought that was very acceptable because she was right.
Yes.
I couldn't help her with her job, but she could help me with my job.
That's a great respectful answer too. That's really good. Appreciate that example. And then if you do say no, and you're being respectful, you may want to make sure that you're able to defend that position. And if you do say yes, you can make sure also that you're again making sure you've got the time to do it, But if you do say no and you kind of want to be a team player and it makes sense to be a team player, you could say, well, I can't do it right now, but, and then you can give a time frame. You could come back and check with me, and maybe if it's a small project in the next week, and I can see if I have additional time on my schedule. Or you might even say, if it's a major project, well, that's something I'd like to be involved in, but not this year. I've just got too much on my plate this year. And those things happen, and people can respect that. And I think a lot of times most people will respect that. And then, so we're really talking about when we talk about how leaders interact with people, we're talking about another aspect of communication, and that is preserving the relationship. So I want to talk about that next. So effective leaders know how to maintain and develop relationships through the art of communication. And you brought this up earlier about trust, but leaders should have an open door, or at least a two-way communication platform where they can foster trust, they can foster transparency, which transparency is huge nowadays. And they foster mutual respect. So the goal is really to build your credibility as a leader, or as someone who communicates often with everyone you communicate with, whether it's internal or external audiences. So do you want to comment on relationships? I know you actually wrote a book on relationships. It's more on marriage, but maybe you've got some wisdom for us there, since you just turned a little bit older now.
I'm glad you mentioned about the book, because the book actually was on relationship more than just marriages, but I did name it This Business of Marriage. But, when you communicate with each other, the more honest you are with each other, the more trust you build. And I just recently had someone I was talking in counseling, and they had gotten into a lot of trouble and stuff, and their wife, of course, was telling me everything that was going on and stuff. And I said to him, well, you've done this, you've done this, you've done this, and you've done this, but the biggest thing you've done, and the hardest thing you're gonna have to recover from, is the trust that you've broken with her. And I think that's not only in a marriage situation, that's in relationships with friends, with whatever. They thought they could trust you,
Right.
and now they can't. It's going to take a while to get that trust back. So it's very important, trust, as you said, you foster trust, because once it's gone, it's gone.
Yep. And trust is earned, so you can't just acquire it easily. You have to earn it over a time period. And once you lose it, it's hard. Like you said, it's hard to reacquire trust.
And the same thing is respect.
Yes.
When the way that you've said things today, Bill, with the way that you've talked to people, it's easy for me to respect somebody like that. Because you're being honest with me. You're not being mean. You're not being vindictive or anything. You just, here's the facts. I'm laying out the facts.
Yep.
And you also said, now here's another job that might be better for you. I can be on board with somebody that's going to treat me like a human being. And
Yep.
I think that's what most people.
I grew up watching Dragnet a lot. Just the facts, ma'am.
That's
just
right.
the facts.
That's facts. Yep.
Well, I want to talk about a teachable spirit next, which I think, again, this is an important thing for leaders to have, because leaders have to have humility and be humble and be teachable. And I've been reading this great book. This is a book about Smith Wigglesworth. He was one of the leaders of faith early on. I think he was called one of God's generals at the turn of the century. And it's from Smith Wigglesworth on Prayer, Power, and Miracles, compiled by Robert Liardon. And it says, remember, this is from one of his sermons. It says, remember, beloved, don't forget that every day must be a day of advancement. If you have not made any advancement since yesterday, in a measure, you're a backslider. Boy, that's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah.
That hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, whoa, that's a pretty harsh statement when you think about it. So I think for everyone listening, what you can do is advance your communication skills. And that's what you want to do every day, is learn something new, whether it's spiritually or from a worldly standpoint. There's always room to learn and a room to advance. And since we're talking about communication today, I think it's easy to advance. You just have to practice. And most speakers don't start out as great speakers. They practice and they learn from mistakes, and that's how they get better.
Absolutely.
So again, just leading from where you are, let me pose this question about communication, and this is more from a Christian's standpoint, and I just want the listeners to think about this. Are you able to communicate effectively enough to lead someone to Christ? Because that is our call. One of our main calls is to spread the gospel. So that would be homework if you don't know how to do that, or you haven't practiced that enough. That would be a good place to start. In closing, I want to reiterate that everyone should work on their communication skills, even if you do not have formal public speaking role practice with everyone you work with or even with your families. And, by the way, there's something called Toastmasters, which is a club that you can join. I don't know if they have dues, but you join and you basically learn how to make speeches. But think about this in summarizing. Do you organize your thoughts and give clear instructions? Even around home, I'm not always great at this. I kind of assume that, my spouse may understand what I'm saying, but it's good to have clear instructions. And if I'm going to do a Zoom call or a teaching or some kind of phone call that's important, typically what I'll do, and this is a little hint, you can take a 3x5 index card. And the reason you want to use something small is you want to just record the key points. And so you want to have 2 or 3 key points that you want to get across, and you want to stick to that, so that as you're talking, you may have to look down at that card to get yourself back on track, or to make sure the conversation isn't drifting. And then also, do you actively listen? And again, this is a good way to practice at home as well as in the workplace or in the world. When someone comes up to you, are you more interested in talking versus listening? And if you're someone is talking to you, are you actively listening in that you're digesting what they're saying, and then you have points that you're going to either repeat back to them so that you can confirm what they just said, or questions. And that's an art to really work on, is active listening, so that you're interrupting less and you're listening more. And then, do you have a teachable spirit? Little children are always learning something new. I think that's why Jesus said such great things about little children, and having coming to him like little children, because little children don't have biases. They don't have preconceived notions. They're just willing to listen and to learn. And sometimes that's where we need to be. We need to be listening and learning, and not so much that we're spoon-fed. I used to have a spoon that on Zoom calls, sometimes I'd hold it up. Excuse me. I said, I'm not spoon feeding you guys. You got to look this up and go further. And, so you don't want a spoon. You just don't want to eat out of a spoon, because you're always going to be immature if that's how you learn. But you want to go to the buffet table, get some real meat, right? And then, do you have a personal board of directors or a group of counselors that you can ask for input? so that, before you make a big decision or make a decision that's going to affect your organization, if you're the leader, or even if you're an employee over a group of employees, have you considered other people's opinions or counsel? And maybe, sometimes you listen and you go, well, that's good advice, but it's not going to apply to what I'm going to do. So I'll tuck that one away for later, but this is how we're going to do it this time. But sometimes you say, well, that's good advice. Maybe I need to do something a little different here. So in closing, Pastor Bill, do you have any specific comments?
Well, one thing I was thinking as you were saying that was I worked for a bank called LaSalle Bank in Chicago. It doesn't exist anymore, not because I ran it out of business. And then I worked for it became Bank of America. They bought them out. And then when I went to LaSalle, Wells Fargo, and started working there, I would do things what I was used to doing, and then my boss would say, what are you doing? And I'd say, well, that's the way we did it at Bank of America. And her statement was always, well, Bill, this isn't Bank of America. And I think that's important as leaders to realize that if you've started a new job or something, that you need to be willing to learn that new job and listen to what they have to say.
Right. Right. Want to say hello to Kenny, who's on the comments. Hey, Kenny.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Love Kenny.
Appreciate you joining us today. Well, one thing I want to point out too is, we got to be careful as leaders or just, individuals that are in society not to have confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's kind of a new term, but basically what it means is that you're listening to podcast or, especially in the political world,
Mm-hmm.
that confirm your beliefs. And so as a result, you're not really doing any critical thinking. And, I think that was probably very prevalent during COVID, for instance. There was a confirmation bias in the medical community that whatever the CDC or Dr. Fauci said was true, and that turned out to be not the case. And some of the better doctors were the ones that stood up and said, you know what, there's another way to treat this, and I'm seeing it in my practice, and we're experimenting, and we're going this way. And they got persecuted for that because they had critical thinking versus that confirmation bias. So just be aware of that too. Finally, in closing, I just want to say a prayer, and part of my prayer is to advance, like Smith Wigglesworth said. So advance, 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 an onward Christian soldier. So focusing not on past, but the race that lies ahead. So God, please give us the wisdom to focus on the race ahead, not worry about the past. And if we made mistakes in the past in communicating or lost trust, let us fix that through your love and kindness that you've equipped us with, and help us to always live for you. Help us to learn how to witness for you, how to come up with the best way to lead people to Christ in our own words, through our own heartfelt compassion for them. So in Jesus' name, I pray this over our audience today.
Amen.
And until next week, manage yourselves and resources wisely, because we do not know the day or the hour in which our Master, the Lord Jesus Christ, will return. So goodbye, and live your days in excellence.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for watching. Won't you tell somebody to join you next week for the Daily Steward Show, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. right here on WUUCC 99.9 FM with Bill Robinson. In the midst of the darkness, a signal shines bright. WUUCC 99.9, bringing hope to the night. Voices rising, uniting in grace. A church without walls, you can find your place. Your place. 24 hours, the truth comes alive. With every story shared, you can learn to thrive. Spreading words of faith into the air, guiding our spirits, showing we care. Listen daily.